The security guard's hand hovered over his holster as Sarah Mitchell stood frozen at the bank counter, all eyes in the crowded lobby fixed on her. Just moments ago, she'd been just another customer. Now, she was being treated like a criminal. "Ma'am, step away from the counter," the guard commanded, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent bank. Sarah clutched the $250,000 check in her trembling hand, her worn sneakers rooted to the polished marble floor. Her simple cotton blouse and faded jeans stood in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her at First National Bank. "I just want to cash my check," she said quietly, dignity intact despite the public humiliation unfolding. Richard Harmon, teller, at window 4, adjusted his custom-tailored suit with a smirk. "As I explained, people like you don't typically handle transactions of this magnitude." His eyes flickered dismissively over her modest appearance. "Security was my only option." 20 minutes earlier, Sarah had entered the bank with quiet confidence, waiting patiently in line until Richard called, "Next customer, please," with barely concealed impatience. When she'd presented both her driver's license and the check, Richard's expression had transformed from boredom to suspicion in an instant. "This is quite a substantial amount," he'd said, examining her ID with exaggerated scrutiny. "And you want to cash it? Not deposit it?" "Yes, please," Sarah had replied calmly. "I understand it's a large sum, but I have my reasons for needing it in cash. Today." Richard's interrogation had escalated quickly. "May I ask where this check came from?" he'd asked pointedly, glancing at her worn clothing. "It's a legitimate check from this very bank," Sarah had explained patiently. "If you look at the signature and account number, you'll see everything is in order." But Richard wasn't satisfied. "Ma'am, checks of this size require additional verification, especially for non-regular customers." His emphasis on the last words had made several customers shift uncomfortably. "My ID should be sufficient," Sarah had insisted. "The check is made out to me, and it's drawn from a valid account at this bank." "I'm afraid that's not enough," Richard had replied loudly. "Enough for everyone to hear. We have protocols to prevent fraud, and this situation is unusual to say the least." Now, with security approaching, whispers rippled through the bank. An elderly woman muttered to her husband, "What's happening?" A businessman checked his watch impatiently. A mother pulled her child closer, as if proximity to potential fraud might be contagious. "This is unnecessary," Sarah said, her voice betraying a hint of frustration. "I'm simply trying to cash a valid check." "Please step aside, ma'am," Richard announced with undisguised disdain. "We need to investigate this matter further." The bank manager emerged from his office, walking briskly toward the commotion. Sarah stood her ground, shoulders straight despite the public humiliation. The security guard positioned himself between her and the exit, as if she might attempt to flee in. That moment, with judgment and suspicion surrounding her from all sides, Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath and prepared to reveal what Richard Harmon couldn't possibly have guessed about the modestly dressed woman he'd so quickly dismissed. As Sarah stood facing the security guard, her mind drifted back to Pinewood, the dusty little town where she'd grown up. The daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Sarah had spent her childhood in a small trailer on the outskirts of town. Their roof leaked when it rained, and winter nights meant huddling under every blanket they owned when the heating failed. "Sarah Mitchell, you're smarter than this place," her mother would say, exhaustion lining her face after another 16-hour workday. "Promise me you'll find a way out." At Pinewood High School, Sarah's worn clothes and free lunch status made her an easy target. The wealthy kids from the other side of town never let her forget where she came from. "Why even try trailer trash?" they'd snicker when she raised her hand in class. "Not like you'll ever amount to anything." But Sarah had inherited her mother's determination. While others partied, she studied by flashlight when the electricity was cut off. Her math teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez, noticed her talent with numbers and stayed after school to help her prepare for college entrance exams. "They'll judge you," Mrs. Gonzalez warned, "but numbers don't care where you come from, Sarah. Numbers only care if you're right." When the scholarship letter from State University arrived, Sarah's mother had cried, holding the paper, as if it might dissolve. "This is your ticket, baby. Don't look back." College wasn't easier socially. Sarah worked nights cleaning office buildings, while her roommates attended parties. She wore the same 3 outfits all semester while they shopped for new clothes. But in the classroom, numbers continued to be her equalizer. Her finance professor recommended her for an internship at First National Bank's corporate office. "You don't look like our usual interns," the interviewer had said, eyeing her single professional outfit purchased from a thrift store. "I'm not your usual intern," Sarah had replied, "but I'll outwork anyone you hire." She did exactly that. While others complained about menial tasks, Sarah mastered them, then asked for more. She stayed late, arrived early, and solved problems before they reached her superiors' desks. Her first performance review used words like exceptional and unprecedented. 3 promotions in 5 years followed. Sarah moved from intern to analyst to manager to director. Each step up the ladder came with the same whispers. "She doesn't fit the image. She's smart, but clients expect a certain presentation. Couldn't she at least dress the part?" But results silenced the critics. Sarah's financial strategies saved the bank millions. Her risk assessment models became industry standards. Her team's loyalty was unmatched because she treated everyone, from janitors to executives, with the same respect. When the CEO position opened unexpectedly, the board's vote was unanimous, despite reservations about her unconventional profile. The press release announcing Sarah Mitchell as the youngest CEO in the bank's 115-year history made national news. "Will you move to Westlake Estates now?" a colleague had asked, referring to the exclusive neighborhood where executives lived. Sarah had smiled. "My apartment is 15 minutes from the office. Why would I waste money on a mansion?" Her mother's values remained her compass. Sarah still drove her 10-year-old sedan, still shopped at discount stores, still lived simply. Her substantial salary mostly went to scholarships for kids from backgrounds like hers and to supporting her mother's retirement. In her first address to the company's 5,000 employees, Sarah had made a promise. "I will never forget what it feels like to be invisible, to be judged by appearance rather than ability. This bank will treat every customer with dignity, regardless of their balance." 2 weeks into her tenure, Sarah had called her executive team together. "I want to understand our customer experience firsthand," she'd announced. "Each of us will visit different branches incognito. No special treatment, no advance notice." Her chief operating officer had frowned. "Is that necessary? We have customer satisfaction surveys. Numbers tell one story," Sarah had replied, thinking of Mrs. Gonzalez. "But experience tells the truth. I'll start tomorrow." She'd chosen her most modest outfit deliberately. The $250,000 check was her own money, withdrawn from her personal account. Sarah wanted to see how her bank treated someone who didn't look like they belonged. Now, as the security guard approached her at the counter, she was getting her answer. The bank manager, Gregory Phillips, strode across the marble floor with practiced authority, his polished shoes clicking against the stone. At 55, with salt and pepper hair and a perpetual frown, he'd managed this branch for 15 years and prided himself on running a tight ship. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Richard rather than Sarah. Richard straightened his tie. "This woman is attempting to cash a check for $250,000. The situation seemed suspicious given her." He paused, eyes flicking dismissively over Sarah's modest attire. Presentation. Sarah felt a familiar fire ignite within her chest, the same burning sensation she'd experienced countless times throughout her life when being judged by her appearance. Part of her wanted to end this charade immediately, to pull out her executive ID card and watch their faces transform from contempt to horror. One sentence would change everything. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, the CEO of this entire bank." But a deeper wisdom held her back. This wasn't about her pride. It was about understanding the customer experience. If this was happening to her, what about the single mother trying to cash her paycheck? the elderly man withdrawing his pension, the student accessing their financial aid. Mr. Phillips, Sarah said calmly, recognizing the manager from corporate photographs. I understand your concern for security, but I've provided proper identification and the check is legitimate. Phillips barely glanced at her ID. Ms. Mitchell, you must understand that a transaction of this size requires additional verification, especially for non-regular customers. I am a customer, Sarah replied evenly, and I'd like to speak with someone above branch level, please. Phillips and Richard exchanged glances. That won't be necessary, Phillips said dismissively. Perhaps you'd like to deposit this check instead, after a holding period, of course. Behind Sarah, the line of waiting customers had grown. A young woman in nursing scrubs whispered to the man beside her. They wouldn't treat her like this if she were wearing designer clothes. The man nodded. I've been coming here for years. Never seen them call security on anyone in a suit. A junior teller named Melissa watched the scene unfold from her window, discomfort evident in her furrowed brow. She'd started at the bank just 3 months ago and had been trained by Richard, who constantly emphasized knowing your customer. Now she wondered if that was code for something else entirely. Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart raced. Mr. Phillips, I understand protocol, but I believe there's a difference between security and discrimination. I'm simply asking to be treated with the same respect you'd show any other customer. Phillips's face flushed. No one is discriminating against you, Ms. Mitchell. We're following procedure. Is it procedure to call security before verifying the check's authenticity? Sarah asked, her voice steady but firm. Is it procedure to make assumptions based on how someone dresses? An older woman in line spoke up. I've been banking here for 30 years, and I've never seen security called for a check verification. Phillips shot the woman an irritated glance, before turning back to Sarah. The amount is unusual. The amount is irrelevant if the check is valid, Sarah interrupted. Which it is. Melissa, the junior teller, suddenly straightened at her station. She'd been scrolling through the bank's internal newsletter on her computer and had stopped on a page with executive announcements. Her eyes widened as she looked, from the screen to Sarah and back again. She leaned over to another teller and whispered something. The second teller's eyes grew round, and they both stared openly at Sarah. Richard noticed the exchange and felt the first flicker of unease. What is it? He hissed at Melissa. Nothing, she replied too quickly, avoiding his gaze. The whispers spread among the staff. A security guard checking his phone frowned, then looked up at Sarah with a startled expression. Richard's collar suddenly felt too tight. Something wasn't right. The woman stood too confidently for someone being refused service. She knew banking protocols too well, and now his colleagues were acting strangely. Perhaps, Richard said, his voice losing some of its edge, we should verify this check through our system again. That won't be necessary, came a new voice from the entrance. Everyone turned to see Jennifer Zhao, the regional director, walking through the front doors. Her unexpected presence sent a ripple of confusion through the staff. Richard's face drained of colour. Regional directors didn't make unannounced visits to branches. Something was very wrong. Phillips straightened his jacket. Ms. Zhao, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you today. Jennifer didn't smile. Clearly, her eyes scanned the scene. The security guard hovering near Sarah, the tense posture of the manager, the growing crowd of onlookers. I received an alert about an unusual situation at this branch. Her gaze settled on Sarah. Though I didn't expect it to be quite this unusual, Richard's hands began to tremble slightly as he processed the implications of the regional director's arrival. The check must be legitimate. The woman must be important. And he had just publicly humiliated her. There seems to be some confusion, he began, his voice higher than normal. We were just following security protocols for large transactions. Sarah remained silent, watching as the situation she created began to unravel. The truth was moments away from being revealed, and she found herself curious. Would they apologize because they recognized their error in judgment, or only because they feared who she might be? The bank's glass doors swung open with such force that several customers turned to look. Thomas Blackwell, the chief operating officer of First National Bank, strode in with purpose, his tailored suit and commanding presence parting the crowd, like Moses at the Red Sea. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto Sarah, standing at the counter. "Sarah," he called out, genuine surprise in his voice. "What on earth is going on here?" The regional director, Jennifer Zhao, spun around. "Thomas? I didn't know you were coming." Thomas approached the counter with long strides. "I received an alert that our CEO's personal check was being flagged as suspicious." His voice carried throughout the now silent bank. "I tried calling, but couldn't reach you, Sarah." The word CEO hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard's mouth fell open, his face draining of all colour. The security guard took an involuntary step backward. Manager Phillips stood frozen, his expression transforming from authoritative to horrified in an instant. "CEO," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes darted between Sarah's modest clothing and Thomas's expensive suit, his brain struggling to reconcile the contradiction. Sarah smiled gently. "My phone is in my bag. I silenced it when I entered the bank. Proper etiquette, you know." The customers who had been whispering now stared in disbelief. The woman in nursing scrubs covered her mouth with her hand. The elderly customer who had defended Sarah looked vindicated, nodding with satisfaction. Thomas turned to Richard, his expression stern. "You refused to cash a check for Sarah Mitchell." "The Sarah Mitchell?" Phillips stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, Ms. Mitchell. If we had known who you were—" "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Sarah interrupted, her voice calm but carrying authority that seemed to fill the room. "The level of service shouldn't depend on who someone is or what they're wearing." Richard's hands trembled as he tried to process what was happening. Just minutes ago, he had been calling security on this woman. Now he realized he had humiliated the most powerful person in the company, his ultimate boss. I don't understand," he stammered. "You don't look like— you're not dressed like a CEO." Sarah finished for him. She straightened her shoulders, and suddenly, her simple clothing couldn't hide the natural authority she possessed. "What does a CEO look like, Richard?" The use of his name— she had read his name tag, of course— made Richard flinch. The entire bank staff stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. Melissa, the junior teller who had first recognized Sarah from the newsletter, looked both terrified and impressed. Sarah turned to address everyone present, her voice clear and measured. "I came here today as part of an initiative to experience our bank from a customer's perspective. I wanted to understand how we treat people based on their appearance alone." She gestured to the check on the counter. "This is my personal account. The check is valid, and yet I was treated as if I were attempting to commit fraud." Thomas shook his head in disbelief, looking at Phillips and Richard with disappointment. Sarah maintained her composure, showing no anger despite the humiliation she had endured. Instead, she picked up her ID and the check from the counter with dignified movements. "I believe," she said with quiet authority, "we have some things to discuss about customer service at First National Bank." The transformation was complete. Though she hadn't changed her clothing or her appearance, everyone now saw Sarah Mitchell for who she truly was. The CEO who had risen from poverty to lead a financial empire, standing before them in her unassuming glory. Sarah gestured toward the bank's conference room. "Mr. Phillips, Mr. Harmon, shall we continue this conversation in private?" Her voice was calm, but it carried unmistakable authority. As they walked away from the counter, she turned to the waiting customers. "I apologize for the delay. Everyone will be served promptly now." Then, addressing Thomas and Jennifer, she added, "Please ensure all customers receive exceptional service while we talk." Inside the glass-walled conference room, Sarah took a tiu seat at the head of the table. Richard Harmon couldn't bring himself to look up from his trembling hands. Manager Phillips tugged at his collar, his face flushed with mortification. "Before we begin," Sarah said, "I want to be clear. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about learning." Richard finally raised his eyes, revealing tears of shame. "Ms. Mitchell, I can't begin to express how sorry I am. I made terrible assumptions. I was wrong." His voice cracked. "I'll clear out my desk immediately." Sarah studied him for a moment. "Is that what you think I want? To fire you?" "It's what I deserve," Richard whispered. Sarah leaned forward. "Tell me, Richard, why did you treat me the way you did today?" He swallowed hard. I judged you by your appearance. I assumed someone dressed like you couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason to cash such a large check. And if I had been wearing an expensive suit, I would have treated you differently," he admitted, the truth painful but necessary. Sarah nodded. "At least you're honest about it." She turned to Phillips. "And you, as manager, reinforced this behavior rather than questioning it." Phillips nodded miserably. "I failed as a leader today." Sarah stood and walked to the window overlooking the bank floor. Customers were being served, but many were still glancing toward the conference room. "When I was appointed CEO, I promised to create a bank that serves all people with dignity," she said, "not just those who look wealthy or important." She turned back to face them. "Today showed me how far we still have to go." Richard wiped his eyes. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced, but today proved otherwise." "Recognition is the first step toward change," Sarah replied. "Starting tomorrow, we're implementing new training programs across all branches. Dignity banking will be our new standard, where every customer is treated with the same respect, regardless of appearance, account balance, or background." Phillips straightened. "I'll personally oversee the implementation in this branch." "Good," Sarah said. "And Richard, instead of losing your job, you'll help develop this program. Your experience today makes you uniquely qualified to speak about the impact of bias." Richard looked up, disbelief crossing his face. "You're giving me a chance to make this right?" "We all deserve the opportunity to learn and grow," Sarah said, "myself included." 3 months later, First National Bank launched its Dignity Banking Initiative nationwide. The program received widespread media attention, with many outlets praising the bank's commitment to equal treatment for all customers. Richard Harmon became the program's most passionate advocate. He traveled to branches across the country, sharing his story without excuses or defensiveness. "I looked at a woman in simple clothes and decided she didn't deserve the same respect as someone in expensive attire," he would tell fellow employees. "I was completely wrong, and it took meeting our CEO incognito to realize my bias." The bank's customer satisfaction scores rose dramatically. New accounts increased by 30%, with many citing the bank's inclusive values as their reason for switching. On the anniversary of that fateful day, Richard knocked on Sarah's office door, holding a small gift bag. "Come in," Sarah called. Richard entered, standing taller than he had a year ago. "I wanted to thank you," he said, placing the bag on her desk. "You could have fired me. Instead, you helped me become a better person." Sarah opened the bag and pulled out a framed photograph of Richard with a diverse group of customers, all smiling. The inscription read, "Dignity has no dress code." "The branch looks different now," Richard said. "But more importantly, I see differently." Sarah smiled. That was always the goal. As Richard turned to leave, Sarah called after him. "By the way, I'm visiting another branch incognito next week. Any fashion advice?" Richard laughed. "Just be yourself, Ms. Mitchell. That's more than enough." The story of Sarah Mitchell and Richard. Harmon isn't just about a bank teller and a CEO. It's about the invisible barriers we create between each other every single day. In coffee shops, in stores, in offices around the world, people are being sized up, categorized, and valued based on what they wear, how they speak, or what they appear to own? How many brilliant minds have we dismissed because they didn't match our image of success? How many valuable connections have we missed because someone didn't look the part? Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance? That sting of being dismissed before you could even speak. Or perhaps you've been on the other side, making quick assumptions about someone's worth, intelligence, or capabilities based on superficial factors. We all carry these biases, often without realizing it. They're whispered to us by society, reinforced by media, and hardened by our own insecurities. But awareness is the first step toward change. The next time you meet someone new, pause before your mind races to categorize them. What assumptions are you making? What stories are you telling yourself about who they are or what they're capable of? Challenge those thoughts. Look deeper. Have you experienced something similar to Sarah or Richard? Perhaps you were underestimated and proved someone wrong. Or maybe you misjudged someone and learned a valuable lesson. Your story matters, and sharing it might help others recognize their own biases. Share your experiences in the comments below. How has appearance-based judgment affected your life? What did you learn from it? By sharing our stories, we create a community of understanding and growth. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more content that challenges perspectives and opens hearts. Together, we can build a world where people are valued for who they truly are, not how they appear. As Sarah Mitchell often says to new employees at First National Bank, true leadership isn't about looking important. It's about making others feel important. Wear your power lightly, but carry your respect for others heavily. In the end, we're all just people trying to be seen for who we really are.